I recently finished a book which reminded me of a case we had read previously in this class. I just finished reading Seal of Honor by Gary Williams, which was an Operation Red Wings and life story of Navy Lieutenant Mike Murphy. Mike Murphy was the first Navy SEAL to be awarded the Medal of Honor. The leadership Mike Murphy showed during his extreme time of crisis is what reminded me of the case study Leadership in Crisis, Ernest Shackleton, and the Epic Voyage of Endurance. During this presentation, I will be talking a little bit about Mike Murphy and his leadership throughout the notorious basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, as well as the leadership he displayed in his final hours in the Hindu Kush Mountains. I will be talking about the expedition of Ernest Shackleton and the decision he made during his 2-year ordeal. Lastly, I will discuss some of the similarities I saw between the two leaders. After graduating from Penn State University, Mike Murphy joined the Navy and decided he wanted to become a Navy SEAL. From the very beginning, he knew he wanted to be a leader. In September of 2000, he accepted an appointment to the U.S. Navy Officer Candidate School, where he excelled as a member of the Navy. After completing this school, he began the world's toughest training, Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL BUDS training. BUDS is a 6-month training course at the first step of becoming a Navy SEAL. He was described as a tough but fair leader who expected the best of his men, but would take the blame for others under his command. Lieutenant Murphy earned the coveted SEAL Trident, which he came on board SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1 in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii of 2002. In early 2005, Murphy was assigned to SEAL Delivery Vehicle 1 as an assistant officer in charge of the Alpha platoon and which deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. In 2005, Lieutenant Murphy was the officer in charge of the 4-man SEAL team conducting initial recon for Operation Red Wing. Their goal was to confirm the location of known terrorist leaders. After inserting into the mountains and walking up multiple miles of hills, the SEALs were spotted by 3 goat herders who were initially detained and then released. It is believed that the goat herders immediately reported the SEALs' locations to the terrorist fighters. The 4-man team became immediately outnumbered, and Murphy knew he had to contact the headquarters to inform them of the situation and the danger his team was in. Despite the intensity of the battle and suffering multiple gunshot wounds, Murphy risked his own life to save the lives of his teammates. According to the U.S. Navy, Mike Murphy, with complete disregard of his own life, moved into the open space where he could get a better signal to transmit the message to the headquarters. The following quote is a perfect description of how he led his team in grave danger and risked his own life to save theirs. Moving away from the protective mountain rocks, he knowingly exposed himself to increase enemy gunfire. This deliberate and heroic act deprived him of cover and made him a target for the enemy. While continuing to be fired upon, Murphy opened contact with the Quick Reaction Force and requested assistance. He calmly provided his unit location and the size of the enemy force while requesting immediate support for his team. At one point, he was shot in the back, causing him to drop the transmitter. Murphy picked it back up and completed the call and continued while the other attackers continued firing towards him. Severely wounded, Lieutenant Murphy returned to his cover position with his men and continued the battle. At this point, on what is known as Murphy's Ridge, Lieutenant Murphy died and gave his teammates the chance to survive. One quote from the Seal of Honor that perfectly describes Murphy's leadership styles is, "When you speak, you learn nothing. When you learn only by listening. Listen, then speak, and speak from the heart." Ernest Shackleton was an avid polar explorer in the early 1900s. At 16, he convinced his father to allow him to join one of his first sea voyages, and it was immediately hooked. As he became older, he began showing extreme confidence and earned the respect of many older sailors. This leadership became apparent when he publicly announced the expedition he wanted to undertake. According to Shackleton's friend Hugh Robert Mill, the initial notices elected from 5,000 applicants. Shackleton divided the candidates into categories such as mad, hopeless, and possible. On August 8, 1914, the voyage began, and the leadership of Shackleton began to show. After a few months at sea, the crew had reached the Arctic, but the ice proved to be too much for the crew, and they were suddenly in a situation where they were abandoned in ship. Shackleton was now forced to lead his men to safety, where they were forced to live on the ice. One of Shackleton's leadership strategies, which was to always keep his men busy. This was a great technique to give the men the thought of doing something instead of simply waiting around hopelessly. Another leadership quality Shackleton showed was after they had abandoned the ship, he was no longer legally obligated to pay them. However, being true to his word, he was quoted as stating he would pay the men for each day until they returned to safety. Lastly, he was able to think quickly on his feet, which is another sign of a great leader. Shackleton was able to keep his men alive for a full year, which went on until April 7, 1916. In conclusion, the two men, although from different time periods, both showed true qualities of a great leader in crisis. Both these men held higher positions than their men, but they made it a point not to hold this over their heads. The next similarity was they placed the safety of the men above their own. For Mike Murphy, this meant sacrificing himself in order to save his men. Due to this heroic action, one Navy SEAL, Marcus Luttrell, was able to survive. These men were both able to think quickly on their feet and show creativity within their leadership. Both of these men were strict but fair to their teammates. They were both great leaders, and I would highly recommend reading the book Seal of Honor for more information about Mike Murphy and how his leadership was admirable.